Greetings adventurers and welcome to Loot Goblin Marketplace. Today's treasure goes by the name of That Guy Draws Some Not Safe for Work content, and it's a community submission where I actually got a chance to talk to them alongside another member to hear a little bit more context, because this story is a very surprising one, but one I'm afraid might not be unique to them. So let's jump right into the story. I have a terrible story today, one I will simply call the worst D&D game I have ever played and anyone will ever play. Now, this is probably a bold claim. I bet a lot of you have been in what you will describe as the worst D&D games ever, but I've found it. I've found the absolutely worst DM and player in the worst D&D campaign on the face of this planet. The party for context. My character started out as a black dragonborn warlock. He was an alchemist by trade, who found a magic sword in the forest and got it in his head he was the chosen one, and started a small peasant uprising, only to be put down brutally by the region's dragon overlord, who left him alive so he could spread word of how revolutions are dealt with in his kingdom. Our cleric started out as an Azimir cleric that was an on-the-run nun who had abandoned her convent because they wanted her to kill a child to be inducted into the upper ranks, and while she had no qualms with killing, she drew the line there. Our monk, who was barely mentioned, was a monk who was a mob enforcer after being sold to the criminal underworld by her drunk and abusive father. She got the treatment of being the reincarnated soul of a key master who lived a perfect life of Zen mastery from the local Japanland nation. Our final party member and party scumbag was the Dragonborn fighter who had main character syndrome, which apparently he was in the end, and who had a DMPC hanging off his arm and had an extremely creepy relationship with her, as she was also our primary quest giver. The DMPC was shockingly not that bad. She didn't follow us around or steal glory. She would set up shop in each city and give us quests as we progressed, what I'll generously call the story, to find pieces of a sword that, when reforged together, would be able to kill the big bad evil guy. It was always a point of contention between me and the fighter on who would get the sword. I was a pack of the Blade Warlock, and most of the group agreed I should get it as the big bad evil guy killed my entire village. But as the fighter was the main character, he always seemed to find them first and hang on to them for safekeeping. Let us begin. Okay, so first, his setting is incredibly uninspired. Morality is very black and white, good versus evil. A big demonic dragon is infecting the world with evil trees so it can consume/corrupt the world. There is literally an empire of Darkonia and Dunska in the evil swamps and desert naturally. Every empire seems to be based on the Magic the Gathering elemental type, Hadolithia, Darkonia, Dunska, Umbracilia, the Divine Lands, etc. Next we go talk to a bunch of sphinxes who reveal inner truths about ourselves, and we're all chosen heroes of temperance, purity, forgiveness, knowledge, and piety. Me. Haha, okay, he's young, this is his first time DMing, and this is a dumpster fire. I can dig it. But the campaign setting got worse. The gods also have names of what they did in it. There was stuff like Judress being the goddess of judgment, but then there was also normal campaign setting stuff like Bahamut and Tiamat. Me. Okay, it's a little shallow, but he's a new DM. I shouldn't discourage him. But then the sessions were bad too. Our cleric has amnesia and was once a lawful evil tool of the good empire to basically stealthily kill their enemies. And this was an established backstory, one our character knew in character and most of us knew out of character. Upon regaining her memories, the DM had retconned all that so that she was a good and pious nun, basically all her life, who yearned for adventure and had basically done nothing wrong despite the fact that her whole character revolved around being an Aasimar doing terrible things for the greater good. But the DM decided that no, Aasimar are not allowed to be evil. Meanwhile, there's my character, a black dragonborn who had led a small peasant revolt. Here's a list of things he retroactively revised into my backstory. I was the leader of a massive revolution that was put down by a tyrannical black dragon. I was previously a copper dragon egg. Then I was a copper wormling that was helping the cleric escape the evil empire after being captured. I had my adopted mother, my real dragon father, and tiefling fiance all killed in front of me at some point. I did not ask for any of this, and I was actively against it. But the DM made all these changes anyway. Then he made it so that I am not a black dragonborn, but a copper dragonborn. My patron is not a malevolent spirit and a sword, but the Judress, the god of justice, who demands I bring peace and harmony to all of Darkonia. Me. Okay, this is getting a little out of hand. Can we sit down and talk? All of that can be chalked up to your average GM railroading, but then there's the final nail in the coffin. And before I jump into the final nail in the coffin and the main topic of this video, I just want to say that retconning a story is bad, taking away agency from the player, changing the fundamentals of just how their class, their race, their backstory, and everything altogether intertwines, as well as the relationships between other players such as a cleric. It's a way to get your players uninvested immediately. If there's something that would work right in the story where it's like, hey, you're a person that would definitely help this cleric, how can we fit this into your backstory so that both of your backstories tie into you being part of the party? Totally fine. You having this author mentality and saying, I think this is how it should tie in, so I'll just tell you how it ties in, and it's not a retcon, I'm just a better writer, is a terrible mentality to have, but one that can come from a place of innocence if you're just trying to make things work. Here for this writer, we'll find out that comes from a sense of superiority, but that's something to keep in mind. Now back into the story. One of the players have been drawing not safe for work content of his character and one of the NPCs he's sweet on, which would have been fine, but also they had Rule 34 involving all the other characters. When confronted about this by myself and the 4 female players who were very mad that their OCs were being used in this manner without their permission or consent, the artist merely responded, "Calm down, they're just OCs." I don't even know what to say here. Yikes. We'll go with the yikes. So we bring it to the Dungeon Master and he assures us that, oh, don't worry, none of that will go into the book I'm writing. So naturally, we all ask, wait, what book? And he tells us that he plans on making this whole thing into a published book when it's all said and done. The player who has been drawing you-know-what of our characters is his editor. The campaign was full of some awful BS, but that can mostly be chalked up to, oh, he's just a new DM. But the truly awful stuff has been left in this recounting of the absolute worst campaign in the history of D&D. Honestly, the whole smut thing really overshadowed that issue. And I totally agree with the author here. Funny thing is, the DM didn't, because he gets kicked shortly after for, starting a fuss about all this not safe for work stuff and bullying the editor. Which is why now I have to go with the cleric's account, as they were one of the members who was still there and was a little more diplomatic with talking to the DM, so they didn't kick them out immediately. This is that cleric's account. The cleric followed up with the DM to see if the loot's kerfuffle, which is a nice way of putting it, was handled, and the Dungeon Master stated that it was all sorted out. When asked how it was sorted out, the DM simply said that he told the player to knock off the not safe for work stuff, but to continue doing stuff in preparation for his book. When the DM was asked again to make sure not to include the cleric's character in the story, as it was based on their own appearance, and to make sure that there was never any not safe for work content of her made by the other player, the DM assured the cleric this was not the case. The only problem was that there were lewds of her character. The warlock appropriately became pissed and felt like the DM was more invested in keeping the story quiet to save his campaign and book. So he took to Discord to disclose this information to the rest of the party and make them aware that their OCs also had not safe for work drawn on them. DM, Warlock had the balls to mention the events of yesterday in the chat aloud, mind you, and it's to a point where I snapped and kicked him out. Cleric, I'm sure he believes he's doing others a service. DM, I don't like it any more than anyone else when someone spreads toxicity about other DMs trying to spread fun around, but in the Warlock's case, he's been on my shit list for quite a while, since the Sunday campaign. Warlock saying that story in the chat was my boiling point, and he's effectively done. I've addressed the elephant in the room, and for him to do that in the other chats, no. That's how hate spreads. Cleric, the possibility of not knowing about not safe for work content drawn based on a character of yours is a pretty shitty bit of paranoia to deal with, on top of all the BS real life throws your way. DM, yeah, but to do that in this specific way just annoyed me and such. He's not going to return. No one person should ever ruin the experience a DM's trying to provide and or learn by spreading hate around. Sorry you had to see that display, but no one person should ever ruin the experience of a DM who's trying to spread a good story, and to have that kind of backlash is just a pace breaker. It's already since had an adverse effect on some of the party members, so I've effectively lost trying to continue for Sunday's session. Yeah man, I have no idea why no one wants to play on the Sunday session. Is it because you kicked the wrong player? Because it seems like the editor, the fighter in this story, is the problem, and you as the DM are too busy being an author writing some weird Game of Thrones-esque smut fan fiction in a fantasy setting instead of just being a dungeon master, trying to treat all your players evenly, and not being a creep while doing it, ideally, It always shocks me in these stories when someone's a creep and then the dungeon master will side with them just because, maybe it's like their best friend from high school or it's someone that they just know for longer. And instead of saying, hey buddy, I want you to correct the behavior. They enable it. They empower it by making them the main character, giving them their waifu DMPC, and just doing everything wrong start to finish. I like that the writer here, he points out that there's some flaws in the campaign setting, which is totally okay. You know, my first campaign setting was a little uninspired. The Magic the Gathering chart is a very easy way to get 5 opposing factions with like clear reasons why they would interact, why they would hate each other, ally with each other. There's like a chart all for it. He points out that like, yeah, it's a little uninspired, but everyone's got to start somewhere, right? Let's give them benefit of the doubt. And unfortunately, that benefit of the doubt unveils into this absolute horror show. The DM in this story quite literally says he's the author of the story. We know this because he's going to make a story afterwards, so obviously he's almost like playtesting the campaign. It totally explains why he retcons all these people's backstories, because his logic is, well, I'm going to rewrite so-and-so's story anyways. I don't like how his warlock's set up. Instead of just writing it differently in my upcoming story, I'm just going to retcon it so he roleplays the correct character I wanted to make, which is a really bad mentality. You as the DM help facilitate the story, but everyone does. It's a collaborative storytelling environment. You are not the sole author. As the DM, in many ways, you are the god of the story. But you're supposed to be fair in the way that you flow and you react how the players interact too. So if you have this mentality that you're God, you're the ultimate author, and so-and-so is the main character, well, every time someone else tries to do anything important, you're going to railroad them to get them back on the way of the correct story. But here's the thing. It was never the correct story. It should never be the correct story. The only correct story is a story where the DM gets to do some cool things, the players get to do some cool things, everyone walks away having a good time, and if you're lucky, you know, maybe you get to have the characters do some growth as well. If you guys like the video, make sure to like and subscribe. It's really helping the channel grow. I've been seeing these long form videos do better and better every week, which is really cool to see. And I really hope to see you guys in the next one. Farewell for now. Community shoutout time. Thank you Apocalypso, Deadly Plays, Alfonso, and Bloodsmith Gamer. Thank you for making this all possible with your support.